They'll be getting this shot whether they like it or not, and a lot more shots after this.
I honestly don't know what the hell he's talking about, but is this part of the problem in terms of getting people vaccinated?
Yeah, so I think he's really a saboteur. That's what I think of Tucker Carlson. Every night he has a million questions about this vaccine. Somehow, magically, he has no one on his show that can answer these questions. I'm willing to answer these questions. And I have a question. I have two questions for Tucker Carlson. Number one, have you been vaccinated?
Right.
And number two, why won't you tell your audience whether you've been vaccinated? I'm tired of his nonsense.
Yeah. It would be nice to know the answer to those questions. I'm not sure we'll get them, but Dr. Jonathan Reiner, thanks so much for asking them.
If you're lucky enough not to consume the steady stream of bullshit being peddled by Tucker Carlson every night, you're probably unaware that when he wants to say something, he doesn't have the audacity to actually say what he means, and so instead, he just asks questions, innocent questions. And so for months, he's had many questions about the vaccine, like, do we know how many people have been killed from the vaccine? What do we really know about the vaccine? But despite his puzzled look, he clearly knows that the implication of these questions is to drum up vaccine hesitancy. And yet while he's pushing his viewers away from getting it, the question remains as to whether Tucker himself got the vaccine. And so I guess my response would be, why won't Tucker Carlson tell his audience if he's been vaccinated? What's he trying to hide? Does he know that what he's saying is complete BS? I'm not suggesting anything one way or the other, I'm simply asking questions. Now, one instance in particular where the danger of Tucker Carlson's message became evident was a segment like this one.
Between late December of 2020 and last month, a total of 3,362 people apparently died after getting the COVID vaccine in the United States. 3,362. That's an average of roughly 30 people every day. So what does that add up to? By the way, that reporting period ended on April 23, and we don't have numbers past that, not quite up to date. But we can assume that another 360 people at that rate have died in the 12 days since. So you put it all together, and that is a total of 3,722 deaths. That's almost 4,000 people who died after getting the COVID vaccines. The actual number is almost certainly higher than that, perhaps vastly higher than that. The data we just cited come from the Vaccine Adverse Events Reporting System, VAERS. VAERS is managed by the CDC and the FDA. VAERS has received a lot of criticism over the years, some of it founded. Some critics have argued for a long time that VAERS undercounts vaccine injuries. A report submitted to the Department of Health and Human Services in 2010 concluded that, quote, fewer than 1% of vaccine adverse events are reported by the VAERS system, fewer than 1%. So what is the real number of people who apparently have been killed or injured by the vaccines? Well, we don't know that number. Nobody does, and we're not going to speculate about it on this show. But it's clear that what is happening now, for whatever reason, is not even close to normal. It's not even close to what we see in previous years with previous vaccines.
And so while Carlson's intent here is clearly to scare his viewers out of getting the vaccine, his points are egregiously, dangerously misleading. So first and foremost, Carlson says that 3,362 people died in total after getting the vaccine, or 30 people per day, citing data from the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS. But just because someone died after getting the vaccine doesn't mean they died from the vaccine. That distinction is not only important, it's absolutely essential. Consider that by April 23rd, the end point of the data that Carlson cites, over 135 million people had received at least one dose, which is over 40% of Americans. According to the CDC, about 8,000 Americans die every day from any cause. So if your sample is a group that's almost half of all Americans, of course there will be deaths, considering humans haven't quite figured out how to live forever. So just pointing to the fact that some people died in a sample of 135 million Americans isn't proof that the vaccine is causing harm to anyone. It's proof that, shocker, people do tend to pass away. In fact, 30 people dying per day when you're talking about 135 million Americans is actually severely below the number of Americans we'd expect to see pass away every day. If 8,000 Americans die every day, then our 40% sample means that we'd expect to see over 3,000 deaths per day out of those 135 million. The fact that only 30 are purportedly dying isn't only not alarming, it actually demolishes the argument that vaccines are somehow leading to a spike in deaths. And beyond that, think about the people who were first to get vaccinated from January to April 23rd, our sample time frame. It wasn't young, healthy children or teenagers, it was the most vulnerable Americans, the elderly and those who are the most sick or susceptible to the virus. These are the people who are more likely to pass away anyway just by virtue of who they are. So again, it wouldn't be some 5-alarm fire when there are deaths among the most vulnerable population, it would be expected. And finally, here's the most hypocritical part of all of this. In the beginning of this pandemic, Carlson was among the leading voices on right-wing media suggesting that the death toll from coronavirus was inflated, that it wasn't actually as deadly as the hysterical liberals are claiming, and that we should all still be able to live life like normal. He even cast doubt on the death rate, claiming that those who died after contracting COVID might have actually died from something else.
For many years, the CDC has tracked the total number of Americans who die every week from pneumonia. For the last few weeks, that number has come in far lower than at the same moment in previous years. How could that be? Well, it seems entirely possible that doctors are classifying conventional pneumonia deaths as COVID-19 deaths. And that would mean this epidemic is being credited for thousands of deaths that would have occurred if the virus never appeared here. We don't know that for certain, but it's certainly worth considering. Something is skewing those numbers. Whatever's happening, this epidemic appears to be doing less damage than anticipated, and it's receding more quickly. Not so long ago, some of our leaders seemed on the verge of panic.
And yet now Carlson is suggesting the complete opposite, that even though there's no evidence that the vaccine is dangerous, that we should all be extremely suspicious. And that even though the deaths that he cited occurred after vaccinations and not because of vaccinations, even though the number of deaths was actually below the expected number of deaths, given that the sample size is 40% of the entire US population, even though the people included in that sample were most elderly and most susceptible to getting sick or dying, still Tucker is out here feeding his audience this fear porn on a nightly basis. And to be honest, I don't even know what the end game is here. To be a contrarian because that's what right-wing media does? To make it more difficult to reach herd immunity in the US because then it'll reflect poorly on Joe Biden? That might be the case, but he'd be sacrificing his own audience to do so. But then again, that hasn't stopped Fox News and Tucker before. It was them who fomented protests against stay-at-home orders, which were intended solely to keep people safe. It was them who politicized masks, which, aside from vaccines, are the single most effective tool we have to stop the spread of the virus. They pushed for restaurants and businesses and schools to reopen too soon before the virus was contained, even though doing so would mean that COVID would continue to spread more easily. And so really, drumming up anti-vax sentiment is just a natural progression for a network whose sole intent seems to be doing harm to the very people who support them. So while Fox News has always been odious and irresponsible, we've now crossed a line into outright dangerous. So if any of your loved ones watch Fox, do whatever you can to make sure that they turn it off for good. At this point, their lives may very well depend on it. To see more videos like this, don't forget to subscribe. And for a deeper dive, check out my podcast, No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, where I discuss the week's top stories and interview major players in the world of politics, like Vice President Kamala Harris, White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki, Elizabeth Warren, Chuck Schumer, Katie Porter, Pete Buttigieg, Nancy Pelosi, and many more. Again, that's No Lie with Brian Tyler Cohen, available anywhere you listen to podcasts.